Firstly, I think our environment ministers, up until now, whether they be federal or state, have done a terrible job. I think part of the problem is that most of our governments aren't aware of just how serious the situation is. If you read all the literature that you can get hold of, all of our environmental scientists and researchers have stated that we're heading for probably a mass extinction. And our governments have totally ignored that fact. And I think it's obvious to most people now that if they continue on this track, I hate to think what our future generations are going to have left. Most people would be aware that the ecosystem is built like a spider's web, so that if you take a piece out, sooner or later, down the track, you know, it might be in a year's time, it might be in 10 years' time, but sooner or later that will have an effect on the whole of the environment. So we actually have to try to conserve all species, whether they be lovely little furry koalas or whether they be spiders or frogs. It actually makes no difference whatsoever. We've probably got the worst extinction record of any of the modern world countries. People of my age particularly will remember Australia as an absolutely beautiful country that was full of wildlife everywhere you went. But now, unfortunately, progress and greed have taken over. And I think as a people, we just seem to have lost what we used to have. And if we continue, we're going to leave nothing for our future generations. I think two of the main problems are greed and apathy. That seems to be how our society's going at the moment. I'd like to see Australia's population stabilised. We actually don't have the infrastructure now to be able to keep up with the population that we have. And if you could imagine that if we're going to move further and further out into the Australian bush, what's then going to happen to our environment? I can see many more problems. You know, like we've only got to go back a year or so, and we went through a 6 or 7 year drought, and we couldn't cope with the water supply. And if you can imagine millions more people in this country, you know, it just doesn't bear thinking about, really. The environment is not taken seriously enough by our governments, whether it be federal or state. It's just what I was saying before, where we've actually got away from our total connection with the earth and the forest and the rivers and the ocean. We are the only species that's ever lived on this planet that destroys its own environment. No other species does that, and we are continuing to do it. And the other thing on that issue is we can't expect the government to solve all these problems. I believe that big business, corporations that have had the benefit of this country for years and years and years, and that our country has got them to where they are now, I think it's time to put something back. I think our tourism industry has quite a bit to answer, actually, because when you think of the billions of dollars that they get in from the tourists from all over the world, and the kangaroo and the koala particularly, 70% of our overseas visitors want to see a kangaroo and a koala in the wild, not in a zoo, in the wild. And here we have the Australian tourism industry doing nothing about the kangaroo slaughter and doing nothing about the fact that our koalas will maybe be facing extinction in southeast Queensland. which is very, very sad. We are going to have progress in this country, and we're going to have mining, and we're going to have land development, but we have to do it better. I'd like to see the corporations get more involved. Now, if they can't do it physically, maybe they can help in a financial way where they can support programs such as koala diaries, for instance, or rainforest rescue, all these sorts of great organisations. Let's take mining now, for instance. Work with the mining company, because these mining companies are going to mine anyway. So if we as conservationists are working with them, surely we can then have a much better outcome than if we spend all our time in court fighting them and losing the battle anyway. That's how I'd like to see it. I recently went to Cairns to address a development luncheon. Most of them had the attitude that I was a tree hugger and that I would be against mining and development and progress. But that isn't the case. I said to these people, why not have us on side so that we can all get a better outcome, and not just for us, but for the country as a whole.